Hey y'all, today let's dive into an abbreviated history of American comic books. And just to clarify, the focus on America is simply because that's where my knowledge lies. I'm always down to broaden my horizons, so if you have any cool information or videos on non-American comics, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Now let's get into it. Generally speaking, comics are a medium expressing ideas through a combination of images and text, often presented as sequential panels. This is why early animated cartoons were called comics. The history of comics is a global journey, with roots tracing all the way back to the Lascaux cave paintings in France. By the mid-20th century, comics had gained popularity worldwide. Quick note before we start, American comic history is divided into eras with debated date ranges. I am all for peaceful discussion, but y'all be nice. Now, it's impossible to discuss American comics without acknowledging their European roots. Regarded as the first comics artist, Rodolphe Töpfer began publishing as early as 1827. His work, Histoire de Monsieur Villebois, was reprinted in the US without his consent, marking the first American comic. This is known as the Victorian Age of Comics, which lasted until just before 1900. Unlicensed Töpfer comics continued and served as an inspiration to American artists. Production and distribution were limited at this time to those wealthy enough to afford it, and it wasn't until advancements allowed for the easy and cheap reproduction of images that the American comic took off. This led to the Platinum Age, which lasted from the late 1890s to the late 1930s and was kicked off by Richard F. Outcault's Hogan's Alley. Thin periodicals dubbed comic books appeared in the 1930s, at first reprinting newspaper comic strips, then moving to original content by the end of the decade. The Golden Age of comics began in 1938 with the debut of Superman. This led to a meteoric rise in the superhero genre, as well as a huge spike in overall comic book sales. Now in the public eye, the content within the books was scrutinized for the effect they had on young readers. This culminated in the Senate comic book hearings of 1954. In response, the U.S. comic book industry set up the Comics Magazine Association of America and released the Comics Code, which required all books to go through a strict approval process. The superhero genre took a nosedive post-World War II, but it was its resurgence that led us to the Silver Age with the debut of The Flash. I also need to note that Marvel Comics popped off during this era as well, and I know if I didn't bring that up, I'd get some angry comments, so there you go. This era also brought about the first comics published without passing through the inspection of the CMAA since its inception. The next age, dubbed the Bronze Age, ran from the very early 1970s through the mid-1980s and marked the rise of comic book specialty stores, which necessitated the distinction between newsstand and direct comic books. Before these dedicated storefronts, comics were considered disposable impulse buys at newsstands and corner stores, who in return could send back unsold inventory for a partial refund. The debut of comic book stores led to the creation of direct sales. Direct sales were the books sold to stores that were unable to be returned. For vendors, that meant being able to buy the comics at a discount to make up for the inability to get a refund on the comics they didn't sell. Publishers then needed a way to be able to identify comics they had to accept for a refund and the comics they didn't. And they did this through modifications to the barcodes on direct sales. This distinction was most significant in the Bronze and early modern ages, as it eventually faded away with technological advances that allowed publishers to simply print two different barcodes. The more valuable edition of each book really varies from case to case. The late 1970s saw the arrival of the graphic novel, or book-length comics, propelling us into the modern age of comic books starting in the mid-1980s. Fast forward to the year 2000, when a company named Comics Guarantee began the practice of slabbing comic books. There's a strong debate as to the value and validity of this service. I am not a huge fan of graded books personally, but to each their own. In November 2011, the Comics Code was made formally defunct. And that's all I have for you today. So keep on collecting, keep on reading, and have a wonderful day out there.